David had always found peace in the mountains. After his messy divorce 3 months ago, these weekend hikes became his escape from the city noise and office stress. He worked as a software engineer in Seattle, spending most days staring at computer screens. But out here among the tall pine trees and rocky trails, he could finally breathe. This particular Saturday morning in October started like any other hiking trip. David packed his usual gear, checked the weather forecast, and drove 2 hours to reach one of his favorite trails in the Cascade Mountains. He had hiked this area dozens of times over the past 5 years. Every rock, every turn in the path felt familiar to him. The morning was crisp and clear when he started walking. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, and his boots crunched softly on fallen leaves. David loved hiking alone. No need to match anyone else's pace or make small talk. Just him, nature, and his thoughts. For the first 3 hours, everything went perfectly. Followed the main trail, took his usual breaks, and even spotted a family of deer grazing in a small meadow. The autumn colors were spectacular this year. Red maples mixed with golden aspens, creating a natural painting that no artist could match. But then something strange happened. Around noon, a thick fog started rolling in from the west. David had seen mountain fog before, but this was different. It moved faster than normal fog, and it seemed to swallow everything in its path. Within minutes, the clear mountain air turned into a gray, swirling mist. David wasn't too worried at all. First, he pulled out his phone to check his GPS app, figuring he could use it to navigate back to the main trail if needed. But when he looked at the screen, his heart sank. No signal. Not even one bar. He tried turning the phone off and on again. It's nothing. He walked to higher ground, holding the phone up toward the sky. Still nothing. This had never happened before on this trail. He always had at least some cell coverage in. This area, the fog kept getting thicker. Soon, David could barely see 10 feet in any direction. The familiar trail markers disappeared. The mountains he used for navigation vanished completely. Even the sound seemed muffled, as if the fog was absorbing everything. David stopped walking and tried to think clearly. He was an experienced hiker. He knew the basic rules of getting lost. Stay calm. Don't panic. Try to retrace your steps. Use a compass if you have one. He pulled out his small compass, but something was wrong with it too. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. David tapped it several times, thinking maybe it was broken. But the needle just kept spinning. A cold feeling started growing in his stomach. This wasn't normal. None of this made sense. He decided to try walking back the way he came, but after 20 minutes, nothing looked familiar. The trees all seemed the same. Every rock looked identical. It was like the fog had erased all the landmarks he knew. David's breathing started getting faster. His palms felt sweaty, despite the cool air. He had read stories about experienced hikers getting lost and never being found. Was this how it happened? Is this how people just vanished in the wilderness? He forced himself to stop and take deep breaths. Panic wouldn't help. He needed to stay rational. Maybe he should just sit down and wait for the fog to clear. Weather like this usually didn't last long in the mountains. But as he stood there in the thick gray mist, he realized how quiet everything had become. No bird songs, no wind in the trees, no insects buzzing. Just complete, eerie silence. That's when he heard the voice. "Come with me, human." The words came from somewhere to his left, clear as a bell despite the muffling fog. David spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. "Hello," he called out. "Who's there?" At first he saw nothing but swirling gray mist. Then slowly a figure began to take shape about 15 feet away. It was a woman, standing perfectly still between 2 large pine trees. David blinked hard, thinking maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him. But she was definitely real. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, with long dark hair and clothes that looked handmade. She wore a simple brown jacket and pants that seemed to be made from some kind of natural fabric. Her boots looked like leather, but not the kind you'd buy in a store. What struck David most were her eyes. Even through the fog, he could see they were bright green, almost glowing. She was looking directly at him with an expression that seemed both kind and mysterious. "Who are you?" David asked, his voice shaking slightly. The woman smiled, but she didn't answer his question. Instead, she said, "You are lost." It wasn't a question. She said it like she already knew. "Yes," David admitted. "I can't find the trail. My GPS isn't working, and this fog came out of nowhere." The woman nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. The fog comes when it needs to. It brings people where they need to go. David frowned. That was a strange thing to say.
I need to
Get back to my car. I parked at the trailhead about 3 miles back. No, the woman said softly. You need to come with me. There was something about the way she said it that made David pause. Her voice had a musical quality, almost hypnotic. And despite being a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere, she didn't seem threatening. If anything, she seemed completely calm and confident, like she belonged in this foggy wilderness. I don't even know your name, David said. You can call me Myra, she replied. And you are David. David's blood ran cold. How do you know my name? Myra's smile widened slightly. I know many things, but right now, what matters is that you're safe. Follow me, and I'll take you somewhere warm and dry. Every logical part of David's brain screamed that this was a bad idea. Never follow strangers into the wilderness. Never trust someone who appears out of nowhere and somehow knows your name. These were basic safety rules that everyone learned, but something about Myra felt different. Maybe it was the complete lack of fear in her eyes, or the way she stood. So still and centered while everything around them felt chaotic and confusing. Or maybe it was simply that David was scared and desperately wanted to trust someone who seemed to know what they were doing. How do I know you're not leading me further into danger? He asked. Myra tilted her head, studying him with those bright green eyes. Look around you, David. Are you not already in danger? Lost in fog with no way to navigate? Night will come. In a few hours, the temperature will drop. Do you have enough supplies to survive a night in these mountains? David looked down at his day pack. He had some snacks, a water bottle, and a light jacket. Definitely not enough for an overnight stay, especially if the weather got worse. But I don't know you, he said weakly. Sometimes, Myra said, we must trust what we feel rather than what we think we know. Without waiting for his answer, she turned and began walking deeper into the fog. Her movements were graceful and sure, like she could see clearly despite the thick mist. David stood frozen for a moment, weighing his options. He could try to find his own way back, but he'd already been wandering for over an hour with no success. He could sit down and wait for the fog to clear, but what if it didn't clear before dark? What if it got worse? Wait, he called out, hurrying to catch up with Myra. I'll come with you. But I want to know where we're going. Myra glanced back at him with that mysterious smile. Somewhere you've never been before, somewhere that will change how you see the world. As they walked together through the fog, David noticed several strange things about his guide. First, she never seemed to hesitate about which direction to go. While he stumbled over roots and rocks he couldn't see, she moved like she was walking. On a clear, sunny day, her feet found the safest path automatically. Second, she was completely silent. Her footsteps made no sound on the forest floor. David found himself trying to walk more quietly, feeling clumsy and loud compared to her fluid movements. Third, small animals didn't seem afraid of her. A squirrel ran right across her path without stopping. A bird landed on a branch just inches from her head and chirped softly as if greeting an old friend. How do you know these mountains so well? David asked as they walked. I've lived here for a long time, Myra replied, without turning around. There aren't any houses up here. This is all national forest land. There are many ways to live, David. Not all of them involve what you call houses. David wanted to ask more questions, but something about Myra's tone suggested she wouldn't give him straight answers, at least not yet. They walked for what felt like hours, though David's watch seemed to have stopped working too. The fog never lifted, but somehow Myra led them along what felt like a clear path. David began to relax slightly. Whatever else was true about this strange woman, she definitely knew where she was going, as the light began to fade. Indicating the evening was approaching, David started to worry about spending a night in the wilderness. But just as he was about to voice his concerns, the fog began to thin. Through the clearing mist, David saw something that made him stop in his tracks. They were standing at the edge of a small valley he had never seen before. Despite hiking these mountains for years, the valley was completely hidden, surrounded by steep rocky walls that weren't visible from any of the regular trails, and it was beautiful. A small stream ran through the center, reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Tall grass swayed gently. In a breeze that David couldn't feel, the whole place seemed to glow with a soft, golden light. "This is impossible," David whispered. "I've studied the M." David woke up to the sound of birds singing and sunlight streaming through what appeared to be a window. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized he wasn't in any ordinary room. The walls around him seemed to be made of living wood, curved and smooth like the inside of a giant tree trunk. Soft moss covered parts of the floor, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Like after a spring rain, he sat up quickly, his heart racing as memories of the previous day flooded back. The fog, getting lost, meeting Myra, and that impossible hidden valley? For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream, but the unfamiliar surroundings proved it was very real. "You're awake," came a familiar voice. David turned to see Myra sitting cross-legged near what looked like a small cooking area. She was tending to a fire that burned without any smoke, and the most amazing smells were coming from a pot hanging over the flames. "Where am I?" David asked, though he wasn't sure he was ready for the answer. "You're safe," Myra replied with that same calm smile. "You needed rest, and this place provided it." David looked around more carefully. The shelter was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It felt like it had grown from the earth itself, rather than being built. The walls were perfectly smooth, and somehow the whole structure felt warm and welcoming, despite being made of natural materials. "Did you build this?" he asked. "In a way," Myra said, stirring whatever was cooking in the pot. "But it was more like helping it grow into what it wanted to become." David rubbed his eyes. Nothing she said made complete sense, but he was starting to realize that might be normal with Myra. She spoke in riddles, as if she saw the world completely differently than he did. "I made breakfast," she continued. "You must be hungry." She was right. David's stomach was growling loudly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this hungry. Myra handed him a wooden bowl filled with food unlike anything he'd ever seen. There were grains that looked like rice but tasted nutty and sweet, fruits that were purple on the outside but golden inside, vegetables that seemed to change flavor with each bite. "What is this?" David asked, though he kept eating. "Everything." "Tasted incredible." "Food," Myra said simply. "From the valley. The earth here is very generous." David wanted to ask more questions, but the food was so good, he found himself focused on eating. It wasn't just the taste that was amazing. With each bite, he felt more energized and alert than he had in months. It was like his body was waking up from a long sleep. When he finished eating, Myra stood up and walked to the entrance of the shelter. "Come," she said. "There are things you need to see." David followed her outside, and in the full daylight, the hidden valley was even more beautiful than he remembered. The grass was so green it almost glowed. Streams sparkled like it was full of diamonds. Everywhere he looked, there were plants and flowers he didn't recognize. But what struck him most was how alive everything felt. Not just alive like a normal forest, but truly alive, as if every tree and flower was aware of his presence. A butterfly landed on his shoulder and stayed there as they walked. A rabbit hopped alongside them for several yards before disappearing into some bushes. "The animals here aren't afraid of people," David observed. "Why should they be?" Myra asked. "We are all part of the same world." As they walked, David noticed other structures scattered throughout the valley. They were all built in the same organic style as the shelter where he'd slept, looking more grown than constructed. Some were built into hillsides. Others seemed to be part of large trees, and a few appeared to be made from living rock. "Are there other people here?" David asked. Myra nodded. "Many others. We've been here for a long time, living as humans were." "Meant to live?" "What do you mean?" Myra stopped walking and turned to face him. "Tell me, David, in your world of cities and machines, do you feel truly alive?" The question hit him harder than he expected. David thought about his life back in Seattle. The endless hours in front of a computer screen, the traffic jams, processed food, sleepless nights worrying about bills and deadlines. The failed marriage that had left him feeling empty and lost. I don't know, he admitted. I think you do know, Mira said gently. That's why you come to these mountains. You're searching for something real. She was right, though David had never put it into words before. Every weekend hike was an escape from a life that felt increasingly artificial and meaningless. But how do you live out here? He asked. What about food, medicine, shelter? What about winter? Mira smiled and knelt down beside a plant David didn't recognize. She broke off a leaf and handed it to him. Taste this. David hesitated, but something in her eyes convinced him to trust her. He bit into the leaf, expecting it to be bitter or bland. Instead, it tasted sweet and left his mouth feeling clean and refreshed. That plant can cure headaches and help you sleep better, Mira explained. This one here, she pointed to another plant, can heal cuts and reduce pain, and this one can help settle an upset stomach. She continued walking, pointing out dozens of plants and explaining their uses. David realized she knew more about natural medicine than most doctors knew about modern medicine. Where did you learn all this? He asked. From my grandmother, who learned from her grandmother, going back many generations. Knowledge that your world has forgotten. They came to a small garden where vegetables grew in perfect rows, but these weren't ordinary vegetables. They were larger and more colorful than anything David had seen in a grocery store. They seemed to be growing without any visible irrigation system or fertilizer. The soil here is very rich, Mira explained, as if reading his thoughts. When you work with nature instead of against it, amazing things happen. As they continued their tour, David began to notice other people in the distance. They moved with the same quiet grace as Mira, and they all seemed to be busy with various tasks. Some were tending gardens, others were working with what looked like natural building materials, and a few were simply sitting in meditation by the stream. How many people live here? David asked. Enough, Myra said. We are a community, but not in the way your world understands community. We work together because we choose to, not because we have to. They stopped at a large tree that seemed to be hundreds of years old. Its trunk was so wide that David couldn't have wrapped his arms around it. But what amazed him was that someone had carved beautiful symbols into the bark, and they seemed to be glowing with a soft light. What do those symbols mean? They asked. They tell the story of this place, Mira said. How it was found, how it was protected, how it became a sanctuary. For those who chose a different path from what? Mira looked at him with those piercing green eyes. From the path your world is on. The path of destruction and disconnection. The path that leads away from what makes us truly human. David felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her tone that suggested she knew things about the future that he didn't. What do you mean? He asked. Your world is dying, David. Not just the environment, though that's part of it. But the human spirit is dying. 2, people have forgotten how to truly live, how to connect with each other and with the earth that sustains them. She gestured toward the symbols on the tree. These tell the story of people who saw what was coming and chose to prepare. Not by building walls or hoarding supplies, but by learning to live in harmony with the natural world. What are you saying? You're preparing for some kind of disaster? I'm saying we're preparing for a transformation. A time when humanity will need to remember what it means to be human. David's mind was racing. Everything Mira said sounded like it should be crazy, but something deep inside him recognized the truth in her words. He had felt it himself, the growing sense that modern life was missing something essential. Why are you telling me this? Asked. Mira smiled and placed her hand on the ancient tree. Because you've been chosen, David. We've been watching you for some time. You have something that many people in your world have lost. What's that? The ability to listen. To truly see. To recognize truth when you hear it. David felt overwhelmed. I don't understand. Chosen for what? To be a bridge, Mira said simply, between our world and yours. To help others find their way here when the time comes. But I'm just a software engineer. I fix computer problems. I don't know anything about about whatever this is.
What?
No more than you think, Mira said. But first, you need to learn, to understand what it really means to be human, to see if you can survive using only what nature provides. David's stomach dropped. Survive? What do you mean? Myra's expression became more serious. Tomorrow, you begin a test. 7 days alone in the wilderness with only the most basic tools. No modern equipment, no shortcuts. Just you and the natural world. And if I can't do it, then you return to your old life, and we erase this place from your memory. You'll remember nothing of what you've seen here. David stared at her in shock. You can do that? We have many abilities your world doesn't understand, but we hope it won't come to that. We believe you have the strength to succeed. As the sun began to set over the hidden valley, David realized his life had just taken a turn he never could have imagined. Everything he thought he knew about the world, about what was possible, had been turned upside down in a single day. And tomorrow, he would have to prove he could survive in a way humans. David stood at the edge of the hidden valley, carrying nothing but a small knife, a piece of flint, and a water container made from what looked like a gourd. Everything else he had brought on his hike, his backpack, his jacket, even his watch, had been left behind. Mira had been very clear about the rules. 7 days, no modern tools. Only what he could make or find in nature. Remember, Mira said, standing beside him in the early morning light, think less, feel more. The forest will teach you if you let it. David nodded, though his stomach was already tight with worry. He had watched survival shows on television and read books about wilderness skills, but this was completely different. This was real, and if he failed, he might not survive to tell about it. What if something goes wrong? He asked. What if I get seriously hurt? Myra's green eyes held that same calm confidence they always did. We will know if you are in real danger. But part of this test is learning to trust yourself and the natural world around you. With that, she turned and walked back toward the valley, leaving David alone at the forest edge. He took a deep breath and headed into the trees, trying to remember everything she had taught him. About reading the landscape and finding the resources he would need, the first day was a complete disaster. David spent hours trying to build a shelter, but every attempt collapsed. He used the flint to try making fire, but could only produce tiny sparks that died immediately. By evening, he was cold, hungry, and exhausted. He had found some berries that Mira had shown him were safe to eat, but they barely filled a corner of his stomach as darkness fell. David huddled under a pile of leaves, shivering and miserable. Every sound in the forest seemed threatening. Owls, hooting, branches creaking, small animals rustling through the underbrush. He barely slept, jumping awake at every noise. The second day wasn't much better. David managed to build a small lean-to shelter that didn't fall down immediately, but it was far from waterproof. When it started raining in the afternoon, he got soaked. The fire still wouldn't start, no matter how hard he tried. His hands were covered in cuts and blisters from handling rough wood and stone. By the third day, David was starting to panic. He had lost weight already and his energy was fading fast. The berries he could find weren't enough to sustain him, and he hadn't been able to catch any fish or small animals for protein. Every task that should have been simple, starting a fire, finding clean water, building proper shelter, seemed impossible. He sat by a stream, feeling sorry for himself and wondering if he should just give up. Maybe this whole thing was crazy. Maybe he should go back to his normal life and forget about Myra and her hidden community. At least in Seattle, he knew how to survive. He had a job, an apartment, grocery stores, and central heating. But as he sat there, something Mira had said came back to him. Think less, feel more. David realized he had been approaching everything like an engineering problem, trying to force solutions instead of listening to what the forest was telling him. He closed his eyes and really listened for the first time. He heard water flowing over rocks, birds calling to each other, wind moving through different types of trees. Each sound told him something about his environment. The water sound told him which direction the stream flowed. The bird calls told him where insects and seeds might be found. The wind told him about weather changes coming. When he opened his eyes, David started looking at his surroundings differently. Instead of seeing problems to solve, he began to see a living system he could be part of. The fallen logs weren't just obstacles, they were homes for insects he could eat and materials for better shelter. The moss wasn't just decoration, it could help waterproof his shelter and had natural antibiotic properties. On the fourth day, something shifted. David woke up early and immediately noticed that his small lean-to had stayed dry during the nights. Rain, the improvements he had made the day before were working. He felt a small surge of confidence. He spent the morning working on his fire-starting technique. But this time he paid attention to how the wood felt, how dry it was, and how the wind affected the sparks. After dozens of attempts, he finally got a small flame that grew into a real fire. David actually shouted with joy when he saw those flames dancing in his fire pit. With fire came everything else. He could purify water by boiling it. He could cook the fish he managed to trap using a simple basket weave he constructed from river reeds. He could stay warm at night and dry his clothes when they got wet. But more importantly, David started to feel different. His movements became more fluid and quiet. He began to notice things he had never seen before, which plants the deer liked. To eat, where the rabbits made their trails. How the behavior of insects changed before storms arrived. On the fifth day, David experienced what could only be called a breakthrough. He woke up before dawn feeling more alert and energetic than he had in years. His senses seemed sharper. He could smell rain coming hours before it arrived, could hear the difference between the footsteps of different animals. Most remarkably, he seemed to know where to find things he needed. When he needed materials to repair his shelter, his feet led him to a fallen tree with exactly the right kind of branches. When he was thirsty, he found himself walking toward a spring he hadn't known was there. When he needed food, he discovered a patch of edible roots that were both nutritious and filling. It was like the forest was helping him, providing exactly what he needed when he needed it. David knew this sounded crazy, but he couldn't deny what was happening. There were too many coincidences, too many moments when the right resource appeared at exactly the right time. The sixth day brought his biggest challenge yet. A storm moved through the area with heavy rain and strong winds. David's shelter, which had seemed sturdy enough, started to leak badly. His fire went out despite his efforts to protect it. For several hours, he was cold, wet, and miserable again. But instead of panicking like he would have earlier in the week, David stayed calm, used techniques he had learned to quickly restart his fire, gathered additional materials to reinforce his shelter. Most importantly, he trusted that he could handle whatever the storm threw at him, and he was right. By evening, he was warm and dry again, with a good fire burning and a hot meal cooking. He had not just survived the storm, he had adapted to it and come out stronger. That night, David sat by his fire and reflected on how much he had changed in just 6 days. The man who had entered this forest had been dependent on technology for everything. He couldn't start a fire without matches, couldn't find food without a grocery store, couldn't navigate without GPS. But now he felt connected to the natural world in a way he never had before. He understood the rhythms of the forest, the language of the animals, the signs that predicted weather changes. More than that, he felt like he belonged here in a way he had never belonged in the city. On the 7th morning, David woke up feeling completely different than the person who had started this test a week ago. He was leaner and stronger, with calloused hands and sun-darkened skin, but the changes went much deeper than physical appearance. He moved through the forest with confidence now. Reading the landscape like a book, he had finally learned to understand. He knew which plants were food and which were medicine. He could start a fire in minutes, build shelter that would keep him dry and warm, and find clean water wherever he went. More importantly, David felt truly alive for the first time in years. Every sense was sharp and alert. Every moment felt meaningful and connected to the larger web of life around him. The constant anxiety and depression that had plagued him since his divorce were completely gone, replaced by a deep sense of peace and purpose. When Mira appeared at his campsite on the 7th evening, David was ready for her. He had successfully completed the test, but more than that, he had discovered abilities within himself that he never knew existed. "You look different," Mira said, studying his face in the firelight. "I feel different," David replied, "like I've been asleep my whole life and just woke up." Mira smiled, that mysterious smile he had come to know so well. "You're ready to see who we really are," she said, "and to understand why we've been waiting for you." David followed Mira deeper into the valley than he had ever been before. After his week alone in the wilderness, everything looked different to his newly awakened senses. He could smell the richness of the soil, hear the subtle sounds of small animals moving through the grass, and feel the energy of the living forest around him. "Where are we going?" he asked, as they walked along a path that seemed to wind naturally between ancient trees. "To meet the others," Mira replied.
That.
"You've proven you can survive using nature's gifts. You're ready to see our true home." As they walked, David began to notice things he had missed during his first visit to the valley. What he had thought were natural rock formations were actually carefully crafted homes built into the hillsides. Gardens that looked wild and random were actually organized in patterns that made perfect sense once you understood them. Even the stream had been gently guided to flow where it would do the most good for the plants and animals. "How long have people been living here?" David asked. "Our community started about 60 years ago," Mira explained. "But this valley has been a special place for much longer. The original people who lived in these mountains considered it sacred. They came to what looked like a natural amphitheater carved into the hillside. But as they got closer, David realized it wasn't natural at all. Someone had shaped the stone into perfect terraces that followed the contours of the land so well, they seemed to belong there, and the amphitheater wasn't empty. About 50 people were gathered there, sitting in small groups and talking quietly. David's first impression was how healthy and peaceful everyone looked. Their ages ranged from children to elderly, but they all had the same clear eyes and calm energy that Mira possessed. As David and Mira approached, the conversations gradually stopped. All eyes turned toward David, but he didn't feel judged or unwelcome. Instead, he sensed curiosity and gentle interest. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes stood up from one of the groups. She moved with the same fluid grace as Mira, despite appearing to be in her 70s. "David," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'm Alina. We've been looking forward to meeting you. You have?" David asked, still feeling overwhelmed by everything he was seeing. Alina smiled. "Oh, yes. We've known about you for quite some time. Mira has been watching your weekend hikes for months, waiting for the right moment to make contact." David felt a chill run down his spine. "You've been watching me?" "Not in the way you might think," Alina assured him. "We watch many people who come to these mountains. Most are just visitors, seeking a temporary escape from their busy lives. But occasionally, we encounter someone different. Someone who truly sees the forest, who treats it with respect, who seems to be searching for something deeper. That's what you saw in me, among other things," Elena said. "But the real test was whether you could survive your week alone. Many people love nature, but few can actually live as part of it." She gestured for David to sit on one of the stone benches. As he did, other community members began to gather around, forming a loose circle. David noticed that several of them looked familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen them before. "I know this must all seem very strange," Alina continued. "Let me explain who we are and why we've chosen to live this way." Over the next hour, Alina told David a story that was both fascinating and disturbing. The community had been founded by people from many different backgrounds who had all reached the same conclusion: modern civilization was heading toward collapse. "We're not talking about the end of the world," Alina explained, "but the way most people live today simply isn't sustainable. The environmental damage, the social isolation, the mental health crisis, the loss of practical skills that humans need to survive, it's all connected." "So you just left?" David asked. "Not all at once," said a younger man who had introduced himself as Tom. "I was a doctor in Los Angeles. I saw patients every day who were sick, not from disease, but from the way they were living. Stress, poor food, no connection to nature, no real community. I realized I was treating symptoms while the real problem kept getting worse. A woman named Rita spoke up next. I was a teacher in Chicago. I watched children lose their natural curiosity and creativity as they got older. They were being trained to fit into a system that was making them miserable. One by one, other community members shared their stories. There was a former engineer who had grown tired of building things that harmed the environment. A nurse who had become disillusioned with a healthcare system that prioritized profit over healing. A farmer who had refused to use chemicals that were poisoning the soil and water. But we didn't just run away, Alina emphasized. We came here to preserve something important. Knowledge that humanity is going to need when the current system finally breaks down. What kind of knowledge? David asked. Alina gestured toward the terraced gardens visible on the hillsides around them. How to grow food without chemicals. How to build homes that work with nature instead of against it. How to heal using plants instead of synthetic drugs. How to live in true community where everyone takes care of everyone else. Most importantly, added Tom, how to raise children who understand their connection to the natural world and to each other. David looked around at the faces surrounding him. These weren't crazy people running away from reality. They were intelligent, thoughtful individuals who had made a deliberate choice to live differently. But how do you survive without all the things modern life provides? David asked. What about medical emergencies? What about education for the children? What about staying connected to the outside world? Elena smiled. Come, let me show you. She led David on a tour that opened his eyes to the true sophistication of the community. What had looked like a simple village was actually a carefully designed system that provided everything its residents needed. They visited workshops where community members created beautiful and functional tools, furniture, and art using traditional techniques. They saw a library filled with thousands of books on everything from permaculture to natural medicine to renewable energy. They toured a medical facility that combined the best of modern knowledge with ancient healing practices. Dr. Tom Still uses his medical training, Alina explained as they walked through the clinic. But he's also learned to work with healers who understand plant medicine and energy healing. We found that combining old and new knowledge often works better than either approach alone. They visited the school, where children learned mathematics and science alongside practical skills like gardening, woodworking, and animal care. The kids seemed happy and confident, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine excitement about their projects. We don't reject all technology, Alina clarified as they walked. We use solar panels, wind generators, and water wheels for power. We have computers and internet access. We even have a satellite phone for emergencies. But we choose our technology carefully, selecting only what serves our values and our community. As the tour continued, David realized he was seeing something remarkable. This wasn't a primitive commune or a cult. It was a highly functional society that had consciously chosen sustainability and human connection over material wealth and individual competition. The most amazing thing, Elena said as they reached a hilltop overlooking the entire valley, is that we're not the only community like this. There are dozens of similar groups around the world, all working toward the same goal. What goal is that? Preserving human knowledge and values for the future, Elena replied. We believe that the current global system will eventually collapse under its own weight. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, these problems are getting worse, not better. When that collapse happens, communities like ours will be ready to help rebuild civilization in a healthier way. David felt overwhelmed by the implications of what he was hearing. You really think modern civilization is going to collapse? Not overnight? Elena said gently. But within the next few decades, yes. The signs are all around us, if you know how to look for them. She pointed toward the distant mountains. That's why we've been looking for people like you, David. People who can bridge the gap between our world and the outside world. People who can help others prepare for what's coming. What do you mean? Lena turned to face him, her eyes serious. But kind, we want you to be our ambassador. Spend part of your time here, learning our ways and documenting our knowledge. And part of your time in the outside world, quietly identifying others who might be ready to join communities like ours. David's mind was racing. Everything he was hearing challenged his basic assumptions about how the world worked. But after his week alone in the wilderness, he couldn't deny that there were ways of living he had never considered. "You don't have to decide right now," Elena said, sensing his confusion. "But we hope you'll stay with us long enough to really understand what we're offering. Not just to you, but to the world." As the sun began to set over the hidden valley, David realized that his life had reached a turning point he never could have imagined. The choice ahead of him wasn't just about where to live or how to spend his time. It was about what kind of future he wanted to help create. The community had shown him a glimpse of what was possible when humans chose. David spent 3 restless days thinking about Elena's offer. During the day, he explored more of the community, learning about their systems and getting to know the people who had chosen this life. At night, he lay awake staring at stars that seemed brighter and more numerous than any he had ever seen. The community members were patient with his questions and doubts. They shared their own stories of how difficult it had been to leave their old lives behind. They talked about the fears they had faced, the relationships they had lost, and the challenges of building something completely new. "I lost contact with most of my family when I came here," Rita admitted during one of their evening conversations. "They thought I had joined some kind of cult. It took years before some of them understood that I was actually healthier and happier than I had ever been." "But don't you miss the conveniences of modern life?" David asked. "Shopping malls, restaurants, movies, instant communication with people around the world?" Tom laughed. "I thought I would. But after a while, you realize how many of those things were just distractions from what really matters." "When was the last time you had a conversation as meaningful as the ones we've been having this week?" David had to admit Tom was right. In the outside world, most of his interactions were superficial. Work meetings, casual chat with neighbors, texting with friends about trivial things. Here, every conversation seemed to touch on deeper questions about how to live well and what really mattered. But still, the idea of leaving his old life behind completely felt overwhelming. He had worked for years to build his career as a software engineer. He had an apartment, a car, friends, and routines that gave his life structure. Could he really walk away from all of that? On his 4th day in the community, something happened that changed everything. David was helping Tom in the medical clinic when they heard shouts coming from the main part of the valley. They rushed outside to see people running toward the stream where black smoke was rising from what looked like a small building. Without thinking, David ran toward the emergency. A workshop where community members made furniture and tools had caught fire, and the flames were spreading quickly. Several people were already fighting the fire with buckets of water, but they were clearly losing the battle. David's engineering mind immediately assessed the situation. The building was too far gone to save, but the fire was spreading toward other structures and could threaten the entire community if not stopped quickly. "We need to create a fire break," he shouted to Tom. "Cut down those trees and clear that brush before the fire reaches it." Without waiting for permission, David began organizing people into teams. He sent some to gather more water, others to clear vegetation, and a few to move valuable items away from the spreading flames. His years of managing software projects had given him skills in crisis management that translated perfectly to this emergency. For the next 4 hours, David found himself naturally taking charge of the firefighting effort. He coordinated multiple teams, made quick decisions about where to focus their efforts, and adapted their strategy as the situation changed. The community members followed his lead without question, trusting his judgment even though he was still, essentially, a newcomer. By evening, they had successfully contained the fire. The original workshop was destroyed, but no one was hurt and no other buildings were damaged. As the last of the flames died out, David realized that the entire community was looking at him with something that could only be described as respect and gratitude. "That was incredible leadership," Elena said, approaching him with a smile. "You saved our community tonight." David felt embarrassed by the praise. "I just did what needed to be done." "Anyone would have." "No," said Mira, who had been watching from nearby. "Not anyone." She saw the whole situation immediately, made quick decisions under pressure, and got everyone working together efficiently. Those are rare gifts. As they walked back toward the residential area, Elena continued, "You know, we've been hoping for someone with your particular combination of skills. Someone who understands both the modern world and the natural world. someone who can lead when leadership is needed. That night, David couldn't sleep at all. The events of the day had shown him something about himself that he hadn't expected. In his old job, he had been good at managing projects and solving technical problems. But he had never felt truly essential, never felt like his work made a real difference in the world. Tonight, he had helped save an entire community. More than that, he had felt completely alive and engaged in a way he rarely experienced in his normal life. Every decision had mattered. Every action had real consequences, and people had depended on him in a way that felt both frightening and deeply fulfilling. The next morning, David made his decision. He found Elena working in one of the gardens, carefully tending to plants that would provide medicine for the community's clinic. She looked up as he approached, and he could see in her eyes that she already knew what he was going to say. "I want to accept your offer," David said, "but I have some conditions." Elena smiled and gestured for him to sit beside her on a wooden bench. "Let's hear them." "I don't want to disappear from the outside world completely," David explained. "Want to maintain some connections, keep my apartment for now, and transition gradually rather than cutting all ties at once." "That makes perfect sense," Elena agreed. "In fact, it's better for our purposes if you remain connected to the outside world. Remember? We want you to be a bridge between our community and the people out there who might be ready for a different way of living. And I want to understand exactly what you're asking me to do," David continued. "This ambassador role, what does it actually involve?" Elena was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Your main job would be to identify people who are searching for something deeper the way you were. People who are dissatisfied with the emptiness of modern life, but don't know there are alternatives." "How would I do that?" "By living authentically and openly about your experiences here," Elena said. "By sharing what you've learned about sustainable living, about community, about finding meaning in life. Some people will be interested, and some of those will be ready to take the next step. What? And then what? Then you guide them toward communities like ours. There are dozens of groups around the world doing similar work. Some focus on sustainable agriculture, others on renewable energy, others on alternative education or natural healing. We're all part of a larger movement, preparing for a future where these skills and values will be essential." David felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "This sounds like a huge responsibility." "It is," Elena admitted. "But based on what we saw yesterday during the fire and what Myra observed during your months of hiking, we believe you're ready for it." Over the following days, Elena and other community leaders explained David's new role in detail. He would spend several months each year in the valley, learning advanced skills in sustainable living, natural building, organic agriculture, and community organization. The rest of the time, he would live in the outside world. But with a new purpose, his job as a software engineer would continue. But he would also begin documenting the community's knowledge through writing, photography, and video. He would start a blog about sustainable living and self-sufficiency. He would volunteer with environmental organizations and attend workshops on alternative living. Most importantly, he would watch for people who seemed ready for change. The recently divorced seeking new direction, young adults disillusioned with traditional career paths. Parents worried about the world they were leaving their children. Retirees looking for meaningful ways to spend their remaining years. "You'll know them when you see them," Mira assured him. "They have the same look in their eyes that you had when I first met you in the fog. They're searching for something real." 2 weeks after arriving in the Hidden Valley, David found himself standing at the same spot where Mira had first brought him. But now, instead of feeling lost and confused, he felt clear and purposeful. He was heading back to Seattle, but everything had changed. His apartment would become a base of operations rather than a place to hide from the world. His job would provide income and stability while he built something more meaningful on the side. His weekend hikes would continue, but now he would be watching for others who might be ready for the same transformation he had. Experienced as Mira walked with him toward the trail that would lead back to the outside world, David realized that his real journey was just beginning. He had found something precious in this hidden valley, not just a new way of living, but a new way of being human. Now his mission was to share that discovery with others who were ready to receive it. "Will I see you again?" he asked Mira as they reached the edge of the valley. She smiled that mysterious smile he had come to love. "When you're ready to bring others here, I'll find you. Just like I found you in the fog that day." David nodded and began walking back. Toward his car, toward his old life that would never be the same again. In his pocket was a small notebook filled with everything he had learned. In his heart was a purpose bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He was going to help others, find their way to communities like the one he was leaving behind. Someday, when the outside world was ready for change,